If you have a medical disorder or a medical disease state and you ask your doctor, well, why do I have this thing? Knowing at some point in your life you didn't have it based on how you were feeling, what was happening in your body, laboratory testing, etc. So you know, based on your experience, that there was a point where you didn't have this problem and now you have this problem. So you ask your doctor, well, what happened? Why do I have this problem? The typical response will be that the doctor give you explanations for what's happened to you, which no one can do anything about, such as you were born with certain genetics and your genetics have done this to you, or you're getting older and the forward marching of time has done this to you. Now, obviously, genetics are important in what distinguish one individual from another and health and disease issues. And obviously, as we get older, our bodies are aging and things are changing. But the problem with this is what's happening is the doctor's looking for reasons for why this problem is developed in you, and no one can do anything about them. Now, if you look at that, if that's true, so be it. But if it's not true, and there is something that can be done, and you have the belief that, no, we can't do anything because it's your genetics or in the aging process, you've got some problems, don't you? See, the reality is that when we're born, our body's at its most healthful state, right? We'll call that its most physiologic state. You can argue that because obviously there are some situations where people are born with significant health issues. I'm talking about the vast majority of individuals who, for the most part, live a healthy life until their 40s, 50s, 60s when they start getting problems, etc., and get diagnosed with diseases, placed on medications, etc. So, most people's experience is what I'm referring to. Regardless, when we're born, our bodies in those most situations are most physiologic, meaning most healthful. And as we live our lives, either we don't feel this, our body is slowly but surely moving from that physiologic state to a more pathophysiologic state where it's not functioning as well. And there are things that are happening under the surface which contribute to that. Now, why do doctors, therefore, since that is the case, and I'll make my case as we discuss this further, since that is the case, why do doctors perceive it differently? Well, it's, again, a problem with their training. So let's go over the ways doctors are trained. Number one, doctors are trained in physiology. That's how the organs and tissues function in healthful states. For example, they're taught about cardiovascular physiology and pulmonary physiology and neurologic physiology, etc. And those are all very important to be taught, and doctors are given that opportunity. The problem is they're not taught about them holistically, how they function together. For example, in the healthful state, how does a healthy cardiovascular system interact appropriately with a healthy neurologic system? And how does a healthy neurologic system act appropriately with a healthy gastrointestinal system? Now, those are obviously occurring. The body is interconnected. So obviously in the healthful state, these systems are interconnected appropriately. And not having any training or any understanding of that leads to problems. So number one, doctors have the disadvantage of not viewing and not being trained in physiology in a holistic manner, how the systems interconnect appropriately. Big problem. Another big problem is, again, doctors are not trained in how does disease develop at all. They're not. For example, if a person has type 2 diabetes or hypertension or problems with cholesterol or autoimmune disease or cancer, osteoporosis, there might be some insight into that, but not a detailed understanding of how specifically do these problems develop. So they're not trained in it. Big problem. I think another huge problem is doctors aren't trained at all in what medicine is at its core, which is a healing art. So if a person has a problem, you need to understand why they have the problem, how did this develop, understanding there are parts of this that I can't change, but there are parts that I can change, so I need to know those parts. I need to understand them specifically in this individual. And then I need to reverse the process. I need to heal the patient to the best of my ability. That's what you're looking for. That's a true doctor. That's a true healer. Problem is, doctors are not trained in holistic physiology, as I described. Doctors are not specifically trained in what are the individual disturbances that happen metabolically, physiologically, to change a functional system, a healthy body, depending on what you're talking about, into an unhealthy body with disorder and disease. Very important to understand those specifically in scientific ways. And then most importantly, how to heal the problem. So what ends up happening? Doctors diagnose disease states, and they treat them with pharmaceutical drugs, which do what? They have some advantage. They can cover up certain manifestations of the problem, but that's it. They do not reverse the problem. They do not heal the problem. And that explains the experience of most individuals who are treated such a way. If they're lucky enough that the treatment is helpful, the likelihood is very, very, very high that that will be temporary and they'll need more or it stops working. Okay? And why does that happen? Because the underlying problem, which was never addressed, just gets worse and worse and worse. So pharmaceutical drugs and such approaches have their role. But if the doctor is not understanding and looking at holistic physiology, not specifically looking and understanding at how dysfunctional systems develop and turn into disorder and disease, and not focusing on reversing those particular problems to lead to healing, to reversing the problem, and instead only treating its manifestations, leads to major issues. So obviously it's a superior way of handling problems is doing your best to understand why they've developed, what can be done to reverse those things, to heal the problem, and only to use the pharmaceutical approach if you can't, despite your best efforts and understanding these with training, to heal and reverse the problem. Thank you.